So first, the really big question before we can go into talking about what we want out of a letter of recommendation is we want to talk about, why does the letter of recommendation matter? Why is this important? Well, it's important for a couple of reasons. So the letter of recommendation is important because it highlights personal, academic, and social skills. So it's a little bit more than just showing the numbers that you got on a certain test or your grades in a certain class. A letter of recommendation ideally should lend support to the idea that you will contribute and add value to your college campus and then your society in the future. The letter of recommendation should serve as a testament to your ability to do college level work. So your letter of recommendation should be assuring colleges and universities that yes, you will be able to excel academically at their university. And your teacher recommendations especially speak to your attitudes towards learning, your accountability and responsibility, and your academic interests. Now, what does the letter of recommendation matter for graduate admissions specifically? I am going to address both throughout the presentation. I'm going to address both the letter of recommendation for undergraduates and for graduate admissions. The letter of recommendation has a lot in common why we have it for either one, but it's going to be a little bit more specific for graduate admissions. So the main difference between a letter of recommendation that you should get for graduate versus undergraduate admissions is specificity. The grad school recommendation letter should be very focused on the subject area you are applying to. All of the reasons I mentioned on the previous slide about why the letter of recommendation is important, all of those are still matter for graduate admissions, plus the graduate letter of recommendation should really highlight your experience and coursework in that specific subject area. It should hopefully demonstrate previous experience, and it should really speak to your skills as an advanced scholar, your potential to do master's level or PhD level work. So what kind of information should the letter of recommendation address? So in general, for undergraduate admissions and anything, it should address, first of all, of course, your academic strengths and interests. Your letter of recommendation should be able to speak to your strong points as a student, what you are good at, what you are skilled at, where you excel. In addition to that, your letter of recommendation should also speak to your personal qualities. If you think about it, the other materials that admissions officers see, they see your grades, they see your standardized test scores, they see your transcript, and this gives them a set of numbers about you. And that set of numbers can tell a lot of things, but it can't tell anything about your personal qualities. Are you hardworking? Are you responsible? Are you inquisitive? Are you outgoing in the classroom, right? These are personal qualities that should be highlighted in your letter of recommendation. They cannot be addressed simply through reading your transcript. These are the qualities that'll tell people what kind of a student you're going to be like in class, how you're going to be part of their campus community. Your letter of recommendation should also address your role in your school community and hopefully your potential direction in the future. And for graduate students, all of those things, plus more specifically, your letter should specifically speak to what relevant coursework have you taken? What about your major or what you studied as an undergraduate is going to make you qualified to enter a master's program? It should speak to any relevant job experience that you might have had in the field where you're applying for your graduate studies, if you've done any internships, or if you've done any research. So really your advanced skills in that particular subject area, whether it's biology or psychology or literature. What have you done in that particular subject area and in that particular field that makes you stand out? and that shows that you are qualified to enter this graduate program. So again, the information in the graduate letter of recommendation is going to be more specific, more concentrated, whereas the information that should be addressed in an undergraduate letter of recommendation should be more generally speaking to who you are as a student and as a person. So, what does the letter of recommendation show that your GPA and your test scores do not show? So as I kind of mentioned, it lets admissions see you as an individual, not just a GPA or a score. We're seeing who you are as a person to a much greater degree. The letter of recommendation can also speak to what makes you different or unique, what makes you special, what makes you stand out. And for graduate students, the letter of recommendation should show a narrative of your advanced experiences. Your experiences working with professors maybe, or your experiences doing advanced internships or going above and beyond in the subject that you are interested in. So that's why the letter of recommendation is important and what it should cover. So now we'll talk about asking. Who should you ask? When should you ask? How should you ask? So a few basics that apply to both graduate or undergraduate. If it's possible, ask in person. Now, that is not always possible. Sometimes, obviously right now with coronavirus, we're all at home much more than we usually are. So it's not possible to ask in person. It might be you have moved or your teacher has moved. It's not bad to ask over email, but if you can possibly ask in person, you should do so. You should be asking your teacher or your counselor. Now, counselor could mean your high school guidance counselor, or it could certainly mean your EducationUSA counselor if you've been working closely with EducationUSA to help you prepare for your application and admissions. But for graduate admissions, you should specifically ask a professor who has knowledge of your abilities in that subject area. So if you are applying for a graduate program in mathematics, you do not want to ask your English professor. If you are applying to a graduate program in psychology, you do not want to ask your French professor, right? You want to ask professors that can speak to your abilities in that specific subject area. If you are applying to a graduate program in biochemistry, it should be a professor of biochemistry who is writing your letter of recommendation. For both graduate and undergraduate, you want to be very specific and very clear when you ask. What is the letter for? Now, is the letter for general admissions? Is it for a scholarship application, perhaps? What is it going to be for? Make sure you explain to them exactly why you need this letter of recommendation. One really, really important thing is give your teacher or professor or counselor enough time. Give them around a month. Really think about the fact that you are not their only student. Your professor or your teacher or your counselor is going to be working with many students, and they might have 10 students asking for a letter of recommendation. They might have 20, 30. Who knows how many students that they might have who need a letter of recommendation. This means if you ask them last minute, they might not be able to fulfill that request. There are some teachers who decide, all right, I'm writing this many letters of recommendation. And if they decide I'm going to only be able to write 20 letters of recommendation this year, and you're person number 21 who asks them, they just might not be able to do it because of time. So make sure you give them this 1 month's notice. So you're not surprising them with a last minute request that they might not be able to fulfill, even if they would really like to. So some teachers do put this cap on how many requests that they will take. Who should you be asking specifically? For undergraduate degree, you should be asking a teacher that you've had in your last year or second to last year of high school. You don't want to ask a teacher that you had 5 or 6 years ago. You could ask a counselor that you have a good relationship with, whether that's your guidance counselor or your EducationUSA counselor. But in either case, make sure it's somebody who can really speak to your skills and to you as a person. And for graduate admissions, as I said, it's really important that you ask someone in the field. So you want to make sure that you build a relationship, that you have a relationship with your potential recommender. How do you do this? One thing that to really keep in mind is keep in touch with teachers and professors. Keep in the back of your mind, maybe you are a sophomore or a junior in high school right now as you're listening to me, and you have a year or so to go before you're going to do your college applications. Well, keep in mind right now, do you have teachers who you have a good relationship with right now, who might make a good recommender? Keep in touch with them. Stay in touch with the teachers and professors who you feel know you well as a student and as a person. Second, be an active participant. If you get good grades, but all you do is sit in class and don't say anything, what is your teacher or professor going to say in that letter of recommendation that we can't find out from your transcript? So make sure that you actively participate in classes, in interactions, in any extracurriculars that might involve this teacher or professors. You want the people who are going to write you a recommendation letter to have a good sense of who you are as a person, not just, yes, he or she did very well in this class, but, oh, this student is very curious and always goes above and beyond and asks questions and shows genuine intellectual promise, right? You want them to be enthusiastic in their recommendation, not to simply say, yes, she got very good grades in this class. If you think that your guidance counselor or your EducationUSA counselor is the best person to write this letter for you, make sure you schedule regular meetings with them. They don't have to be long meetings. It can just be a 15-minute check-in to let them know how you're doing in class, what classes you're taking, what interests you have, where you really think you're going to be going with the application process. Again, this helps them get to know you as a responsible, mature student who's really capable of taking a leadership role in your own college admissions search. And whether this is your teacher, your professor for graduate letter of recommendation, or your counselor, make sure that you speak to them when you're asking for the recommendation. Make sure you speak to them about your goals and ambitions. That if you have some idea of what you want your career to be or what you want to study, share this with them so that, again, so they get to know who you are as a person and as a student. So, what information should you give your recommender? What should they ideally know about you in order to write a good letter of recommendation? So first of all, they should know what the letter is for. Is the letter for general admissions? Is the letter for a scholarship application? Is it in graduate admissions? Is it for a master's program, a PhD program, in what field, right? They should have that basic information. You also want to let them know the schools that you are applying to. Why? Well, first of all, they might just be curious. They'd like to know. But second of all, they might have connections at these schools. You never know who your teachers or counselors or professors know. If you think about it, especially if you're getting a recommendation from your counselor, they have so many contacts with colleges that they can say, oh, you're applying to University of Kentucky for their International Ambassador Scholarship. Well, I know Rachel, and she's on the committee that decides who gets that scholarship. In addition to writing you this letter of recommendation, I'm just going to email her and tell her that you're applying. So you never know who your counselors or who your teachers know, and how they could help you out just a little bit. With that personal relationship, with advocating on your behalf beyond simply the letter of recommendation. I think it's also really helpful, whether you're applying for either graduate or undergraduate admissions, to have ready what you could call a brag sheet. So this should be something that's not long, just, you know, fits on one page of paper, and it's simply a list of your accomplishments. It does not have to be, it should not even be paragraphs and paragraphs of writing. It can simply be a bullet point list of important things that you think this person should know about you. This might include your accomplishments. Have you won any academic competitions? Are you involved in any extracurricular activities? Your GPA. your activities, and those activities could be sports that you play, if you've done any plays, or you play music, or in a band or an orchestra, if you do volunteer work, anything that you think helps them get to know you a little more or jogs their memory about who you are as a student. And also, it does not hurt to put down there your goals. My goal is to major in biology so I can go to medical school someday. My goal is to major in psychology and go to graduate school and become a psychologist or a psychology professor, right? You don't have to have those goals when you're 16 or 17. We don't expect you to have the rest of your life planned out necessarily, but if you do have some ideas of your interests, certainly put those down. And for graduate admissions, you should definitely have a strong idea of your interests. You should be more specific about your study and your career goals so your professor knows what to address. If you are applying for a master's PhD program in biochemistry, you might let your professor know, well, I'm interested in doing research in this subject area, in cancer research, and my goal is to work for a drug company, or my goal is to be a professor or go into research or to teach, right? But for graduate admissions, you should absolutely be more specific about your goals and how you want to get there, your career goals and your focus in terms of study. So you have asked your recommender, they've said yes, you've given them when the due date is, you've given them the brag sheet with your accomplishments, they are absolutely ready to go to write you this letter of recommendation. Don't forget to follow up. First of all, don't hesitate to remind them if the due date is approaching and they haven't done it yet. Don't be rude, but you can say, hey, I just wanted to reach out and let you know that letter I asked you for a couple weeks ago, that's due next week. Just wanted to, remind you of that deadline. That's totally fine. You should definitely feel free to do it. And don't do it like the day before it's due. Do it maybe the week before it's due. If they haven't done it yet, reach out so just remind them of that deadline. Very important. Say thank you. This is something that a lot of people forget, but it makes an impression. To write a short email or even a handwritten note, which would be even more memorable, and say, thank you so much for writing me this letter of recommendation. I really appreciate that you have the confidence in my skills to do so. It means a lot to me. That's going to, first of all, it's just polite. It's a nice thing to do. But second of all, it is going to make them more willing to write you another letter of recommendation sometime in the future if you need one. So always say thank you. It can be a formal thank you or an informal thank you, but in some way acknowledge that they have done this very nice thing for you, that they have put their time and their effort into writing you an excellent letter of recommendation. And also, let them know how it turns out. That's the other thing that they like. Whether it was a good outcome or not a good outcome, they want to know. So, hey, that letter of recommendation you wrote for me, well, here are the colleges that I got into. Or here's the scholarship I received. Or even if it's, it didn't work out and I didn't get into that school. That's okay. But they want to kind of know how things turned out. And again, remember that you may need another letter from them at some point in the future. So just checking in with your recommenders like this is really good. It's another step in keeping up that relationship with them. Confidentiality. So this is something, just a short reminder, that you should not see your letters of recommendation, that there is a confidentiality waiver that you have to check to say, yes, I agree that I will not be seeing my letters of recommendation. And this is important because you don't want schools to think that you in some way influenced the content, or that you looked at this letter of recommendation and thought this isn't good enough, I'm asking somebody else. You should never see the content of the letter of recommendation that is written for you. So that's just a short reminder, but you should just never see it. You should not have any contact with it, especially now. Normally there'll be some method of electronic delivery, so you won't have to have any contact with the letter itself. So those are the basics. Those I think are the most important points for both graduates and undergraduates to remember about the letter of recommendation. And we can open it up to questions pretty soon, but I have a little FAQ of my own. So these are some frequently asked questions. These are questions that often get asked in presentations or about the letter of recommendation. So I thought I would put them right up here. What if the person says no? If the person says no, you ask someone else. It's as simple as that. And honestly, it can feel really devastating, or it can feel hurtful if somebody says, no, I'm sorry, I can't write you a letter of recommendation. That does not really at all reflect on you as a student. There could be many reasons that they're not going to write you a letter of recommendation. It could be because they're too busy, because they don't have the time and they've already committed to writing a number of letters of recommendation for other students. It could be that they just don't feel they know you well enough. Or maybe you took their classes 2 or 3 years ago and they don't feel like they remember you enough to write you a strong letter of recommendation. So first of all, if someone says no, don't take it personally. It does not mean that they think that you are not qualified for that university or for that scholarship or for that opportunity. It simply means that either they don't have time or they don't feel like they are the best person. And I will also add to that, you would much rather have somebody say no than to write you a letter that is not really very good or very strong, okay? So a no is more positive than not getting into that school because they didn't remember that much about you, so they wrote you a really short letter of recommendation. Can I ask the same person for more than one letter of recommendation? You certainly can, but you want to be considerate of their time. So you want to really think about, okay, I'm not going to ask this person to write me 15 different letters, right? You want to make sure that you give them enough time, but that you also don't overwhelm them with requests. So really think about how many times am I going to ask this person to write a letter of recommendation in this short period of time. Will a bad letter of recommendation hurt my acceptance chances? In a word, yes. That is why I said it's better to get a no than to have someone write you a bad letter. I do not know of any teacher or counselor who would agree to write a letter and then write a bad letter. Okay, I don't think anyone would really do that. You obviously want to think carefully about who you ask for your letter, but more so because you want to make sure it's somebody who knows you well. A bad letter could be classified as somebody who says, oh, this person is not qualified for admissions at your university, so I don't know why they're applying, but no teacher is ever going to do that, okay? You don't have to worry about that as a bad letter of recommendation. What I would say you should worry about more is somebody writing you a letter of recommendation who doesn't know you very well and who can't really speak to your accomplishments and who you are as a student with any amount of specificity. But most of the time, you're never going to have a professor or a teacher or a counselor who agrees to write you a letter if they don't think that they can really represent you and give you the best chance possible to get that opportunity. Can I ask someone at my school who is not my teacher, such as a coach, an advisor, or a supervisor of an extracurricular activity? This one is a little bit harder of a question. And I say that the real answer to this is it depends. So who can you ask who is not a teacher? A guidance counselor at your high school who knows you very well? Your EducationUSA counselor, if you've worked with them and they know you very well? Yes, these can be excellent choices for your letter of recommendation. A coach or a supervisor of an extracurricular activity, that really depends. For an athletics coach, if you are applying for an athletic scholarship, yes, ask that athletics coach, obviously. If it's not an athletic scholarship, then do not ask a coach. What about the supervisor of an extracurricular activity? I think in this case, it would depend on what is the activity. Let's say, for example, you are a member of the robotics club in your school. And the advisor to the robotics club is somebody who's worked with you a lot and you've gone to robotics competitions and you've really worked with this person. That is like an academic-based club. So I would say yes. That would be a good person who could write a letter of recommendation because they could really speak to your dedication, your interest, your skill, how this would help you be, a mechanical engineering major, right? So really, if you are going to ask someone who is not a teacher or a guidance counselor, really think carefully about it. And also you can ask the opinion of your guidance counselor or your EducationUSA counselor. Ask them, hey, do you think it would be all right if I asked so-and-so? They could give you their opinion as well. And you really want to explain, well, why do I want this person to write my letter of recommendation? What is it about my relationship to the advisor to the French club that makes me feel that they would be the best person to write my letter of recommendation? And if you could answer that question really strongly, then the answer is yes, you can absolutely ask them.